Yeah, I got a phone call one evening from a woman called Jennifer, and she said, how much would you charge to write a biography about Family Man? And when could I have it by? And I said, well, a couple of days. I was thinking she meant like a page and a half of, whatever. And since I love Family Man and revered his music, it I thought this is not going to be difficult. um, and she just laughed and said, no, I mean a book. So we arranged to meet in Amsterdam, and I went over there, and we spent 2 or 3 days in a hotel room. I don't think we went out at all, and talking, smoking, playing music. And at first, I thought the last thing that this world needs is another book on Bob Marley. We don't need another book on Bob Marley, definitely, and I don't want to write one either. And after talking to FAMS, I realized that there was a whole side of the Bob Marley story that had never been told, which is what happened to the band after Bob Marley died, and how these great musicians, who contributed greatly to this chapter in popular music history, forget reggae, popular music history, and they'd been sidelined and marginalized and spit up and chewed out. And that would never, ever have happened had Bob Marley, not died. So that became the story, but also the more I discovered what Family Man had actually played for other people and the depth of it. It was just extraordinary. There was so much of it, and it took quite a few years to accumulate all of that material. And what we decided was that the times when Family Man had the most time to relax was actually on tour, hanging around in hotels and so on. So there were many times when I would, go on tour with them or for sections of the tour, and we would do more work on the book. And that also gave me the chance to see him on the road and in his environment as a working musician. And Fams was probably one of the most traveled reggae artists ever, because he'd been traveling since the late 60s. And he's a remarkable person. He should be celebrated as one of the greatest musicians ever, because not just reggae music, bigger than that. He should be spoken about in the highest possible terms, because it was Family Man really who set the tone for that one drop 70s style of reggae music. I mean, that did not exist before Family Man started playing sessions. And I'm not just talking about the work he did with Bob Marley, but also Dennis Brown, also Yabby You, also Burning Spear, you name it. Well, it's in the book. There's so many sessions he played on, and that kind of one drop reggae, which is like the heartbeat, that is Family Man. It's astonishing. That's him. That really is him. He makes it seem so simple, and yet it's so profound. And he's untrained. He never had formal training. It's totally on feel and the depth of how much he feels what he's doing. I feel truly privileged to have had that front row seat onto his life for that period of time. But he's been terribly mistreated, and there's no doubt about it. And it stems from the decision by the Bob Marley estate to elevate Bob Marley alone as the genius, the icon, the so-and-so, and yet without his band members and especially the Barrett brothers, who were with him from 68, 69. Would that success still happen? Probably. Would it still happen to the same extent? I'm not so sure. And I mean, also, you know, he had very, very talented musicians like Wya Lindo and Tyrone Downey with him too. And they were classically trained. And, you know, that made a big difference, because Bob Marley, like the Barrett brothers, was not formally trained. He'd had no formal training. He'd had lots of experience and certainly enormous amount of natural talent, but he didn't have that structure or that framework. Although I'm sure his stay at Studio One really helped bring that on. You know, if you're around musicians like Tommy McCook and Jackie Mittoo and Don Drummond, you're certainly going to have pick up a lot of things, you know.
I heard something about Wya Lindo had something to do with Redemption Song.
I asked Wya about that, and he asked me not to tell anybody, but he's not here anymore. So, but he did say that, yes, he did write a lot of Redemption Song. And Al Anderson, who was staying at the Terra Nova Hotel in Kingston at the same time that that was written, and they were in adjoining rooms, said that Wya had played him Redemption Song, and Al said, you know, what are you going to do with this song? And he said, I'm going to give it to Bob to sing. And if you notice, Bob Marley went on television in Jamaica and performed Redemption Song. He sat there playing a guitar, and Wya is sat on the stool next to him playing an acoustic guitar. The two of them perform it together. Now, Bob Marley had two guitarists in his band at that time, and he knew people like Chinna Smith, and he knew endless guitarists. So why would he have Wya sat there on the stool next to him, playing the guitar with him while he sang Redemption Song? And I think it's because Wya wrote it. And, you know, Redemption Song, the changes in it and so on, Wya was classically trained. He had formal training. Bob Marley didn't. And I'm sure that Bob wrote most of the lyrics, but the actual song construction, I'm not so sure. But Wya did. He didn't want me to publicize the fact, but he did admit to having written it. And, you know, the thing is, and it still affects me to this day, that I used to visit Wya sometimes, and I'm sure his family will forgive me for saying this, but he was living very modestly in a council flat in a not very nice part of London. He had very little money coming in, and he'd been part of some of the most successful and biggest selling reggae music of all time, global hits. Why? Why would that happen? I went to his funeral. There was no one from Island Records there, and there was no one from the Wailers there. Why is that? I remember once going to meet Carly Barrett's two of his three children. And they lived up near Brownstown in Jamaica. And his daughter took in washing, and his son, Jermaine, cut grass on the verges of the road. That's what they did to survive. They lived very simply. And why? Why, if the Bob Marley children live so well, should the children of these key musicians have nothing? I have never been able to square that. It just simply should not be. And that was that drove me all the time to write that book. That was the mission. I wanted people to know that, and I'm not accusing anybody, and I'm not putting the finger of blame on anybody. I just simply am telling what I saw and what I know. And these people should have been looked after. Wya had mental health issues from the early 70s. He never received proper treatment for them. There were times on tour when he would go walkabout because he was so disorientated. He needed a carer. When, they were on tour, he never got help with any of that. I just find it, I don't know. It's just, how much money do people need? How much do you need? It's not right. I never believed it was right. And I'm more proud of that book than anything I've ever done, because it's put forward that kind of information. And I also traced the whole legal trail. When Familyman took out the court case, I was at the Old Bailey every day during that court case. And what I saw during that 2 weeks made me lose my faith, or any faith I had previously, in the British justice system. There was no justice done during that court case. He was smeared in the media. All they could talk about was how many children he had, and the fact that he was this great musician never entered the narrative. Only that he had all these children, and he was trying to get money out of the Marley estate, like he was some scam or something. It was disgraceful. I shall never forget it. It's this is the flip side of the Bob Marley legend, if you like. You see, when I talk about these things in the Wailers, I'm not diminishing Bob Marley's talent or achievements in any way. And and also, I've interviewed Ziggy, Damien, Stephen, Julian, Sedella, and Kamani Marley on a number of occasions, individually. And I've never raised these things with them, because I've been talking to them in my capacity as a music journalist, and on the occasion of promoting their latest record or whatever it is. And it would be very unprofessional of me to bring things like that into an interview regarding a magazine assignment or a new album or whatever. And so, some people may think I'm a hypocrite for not doing that. But the way I see it is, it's a separate matter. It is a separate matter. And I genuinely respect their talent. I mean, I think that Damien and Stephen especially are two of the most important reggae artists stroke producers, of the last 12, 15 years easily. And those guys, they could lie around all day long. They don't need to work, and their work ethic is extraordinary. Um, they never stop working. They never stop creating. They never stop thinking of new projects and making new music. So I respect them fully for that. Um, and maybe, as the next generation of Marleys take control over the estate, this picture will change. Um, we have to think it may well do. But it may be too late for Familyman. It certainly has been too late for Wya and Tyrone and Carly and Seiko, you know.
Last subject, the Marcia Griffiths book.
Ah, good. Yes. Well, it's finished apart from Marcia's approval. She's got to read it and probably make, some changes. But it's finished to this point. And it's taken 2 years, but there have been gaps in between, our calls and so on. But it's probably the result of maybe 50, 60 hours of interviews. And I think it's a great story. It's she has gone through some hard times as well as some very good times. And she's very candid about her journey and her emotions and her feelings. And I think it will be inspiring to women coming into the reggae arena, and also anyone with a talent and wanting to, forward that talent. I mean, because, the last Super Bowl, one of the adverts shown had her song in it, Electric Slide. It was a new version of Electric Slide, and she was on it. And I mean, this is a woman in her 70s and with a tremendous track record going back to the mid 60s. And there she is popping up at halftime, in the Super Bowl. She just is ageless in that respect. And she's very, very well loved within the reggae world. The first ghostwriting assignment I did was Miss Pat of VP. That was very enjoyable too. We did that in a very business-like way, once a week, regular calls, and Marcia had nothing like that, But and she would always say, "Oh, John, that was great. Let's do it again tomorrow." I'd say, "Okay, I'll ring you tomorrow." And we never spoke 2 days running ever, She has shared her path with 3 of the greatest songwriters ever in reggae music: Bob Andy, Bob Marley, and Beres Hammond. Bob Andy, the songs he wrote for her, absolutely astonishing. What she inspired in him, yes, very special. And Beres has written a lot of songs for her too. And it's when you hear these songs, he knows her to such a degree that he knows exactly the words to put in her mouth, the perfect songs for her. So she's been a muse to these people, and yeah, it's very, very special. Yeah, she speaks very well of Studio One, I have to say, because Marcia's argument is, even though she left, for Pastures New eventually, because she wanted more recognition and more reward for what she was doing. But the way she sees it is that she learned a tremendous amount during the 5 or 6 years that she spent at Studio One. She learnt alongside some incredible talents, from the Scatterlights to the Heptones to, Carlton in the Shoes, you name them, Dennis Brown and so on. And she came away from Studio One with songs that she can go out every night, any night of the week, and perform, and people love to hear them. And how much is that worth? How much would you pay for that? For songs that you can be singing every night of your life? I mean, I had times with Alton where he could almost make you weep. He could tell you stories about his mistreatment. And he was an older man than myself and an icon from the rocksteady era. And to see him so upset when I was beginning to write about the music was quite upsetting, because it was all to do with not getting paid, and the treatment at Studio One in particular. And then other times he'd be in a different mood, and he would talk with such great affection about the atmosphere at Studio One and how everyone came together and how special it was. So I think either view is true. I think it's all true. Obviously, I've interviewed a lot of people who came from Studio One, and but there are certain things that, common themes, if you like, and one of them is that if you did ask him about money, he could be very aggressive,
Yes,
and even violent. And I've certainly heard stories about Joe Higgs, who you mentioned a while ago,
right.
Johnny Dizzy Moore, and people like this, who really, found themselves on the wrong end of that. I am willing to concede that there were things about the business that he himself didn't know. And so maybe he didn't get all he was due, but he certainly got a lot more than they did. We're very much aware of all the big selling hits that he had, but he recorded thousands and thousands of records, and a lot of them didn't sell. So maybe the big sellers compensated for some of the losses, and some of the risks that didn't turn out. What I would like is that I would like the Studio One to be the site of something like, you can go and visit Motown in Detroit. It should be. It is it is part of our world heritage. It is a very, very important place. And just like hundreds of thousands of people go and visit the Bob Marley Museum, they should also be visiting Studio One, where so many of these things happened and so much of this great music was made. And so far that hasn't happened. And but it's difficult. I remember asking Edward Seaga why there was never a national music museum in Jamaica, and he explained that it's very difficult to invest the money required in a project like that when there is so much poverty on the island. There are too many social issues. So how can you justify spending all the money on something like that? But the flip side of that argument is that if an institution like that did exist, then they could do courses online or otherwise, and they'd get students from all over the world, I'm sure. And for people of my age group, you know, and people like me, you know, we have all of this material, you know, like interviews, as other people have photographs, recordings, you know, whatever, a huge volume of material that belongs in an institution like that. And because one doesn't exist, you can't donate these things to it. So if they made that step and organized it, it would send a message globally to all of these collectors and journalists and producers and you know, from all over, to actually contribute towards it. I certainly would. But what they've come up with so far um, really doesn't come up to the standard that would be needed in order to maximize the potential of that. But
Yeah.
you know, this is all wishful thinking. I'd also like to just say a key part of my own contributions to this music is that when I started, there was very, very little by way of literature in that scene, and I've always read books about music, and most of the books were about jazz or rock because they were the dominant music, and people were writing books about those genres. Very little was written about reggae music outside of the specialist fanzines or music papers, and we've seen a big improvement in that. We've seen a lot of titles added to that, but that was always very important to me. I wanted to see the body of reggae literature expand, and with the advent of the internet and self-publishing and so on, we've seen that, and also with websites and so on, and that's been a really good thing. But when I started, there was none of that, and you couldn't interview people unless you had the records, or you had contacts, and so you know, a lot has been built up since then. And now with so many of the artists have their own websites and so on, and they've got their own means of spreading whatever information that they have. And we've got interviews like the ones you do. So we're in a much, much healthier place now, which pleases me greatly. Mm.